The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and warm, the way it always did. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The gentle hum of the city outside, the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee from the kitchen. I yawned, stretching lazily, savoring the calm. But as I stepped into the kitchen, my heart stopped. There, on the table, was a small folded piece of paper. Beside it lay his wedding ring, glinting in the morning sun like a cruel joke. My pulse quickened as I reached for the note, my fingers trembling with an unexplainable dread. I unfolded the paper and read, "The truth is, my love for you died years ago. You're dull, naive, and utterly predictable. I've found my real destiny, someone who makes me feel alive. We're leaving for another country to live our best lives together. Goodbye, foolish Margaret." The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes, hot and relentless. I blinked hard, shaking my head in disbelief, as if sheer force of will could change the meaning of those sentences. But no amount of denial could erase what was in front of me. For a few long moments, I stood frozen. The world around me felt hollow, like the echoes of a cruel nightmare. But the nightmare wasn't over. I stumbled to the living room, my breath shallow, my hands grasping for anything to steady me. My phone was on the coffee table. I snatched it up, frantic now. I opened the banking app with shaking fingers, each second of loading a brutal eternity. When the balance appeared, I gasped, feeling like the floor had fallen out beneath me. 0. The savings we had built over years of sacrifice, the funds for the home renovations, the vacation we had dreamed of, the money I had earned from long hours and sleepless nights, all gone. I clicked through each account, my heart racing faster with every new confirmation. Every single cent had been drained. My breath came in ragged gasps, the realization sinking its claws deeper. He hadn't just left me. He had robbed me of everything we had built together. My mind spun with fragmented memories. His reassuring smile when we discussed our future, the way he promised me stability after years of hardship. Lies. All of it lies. I clutched the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Panic swelled in my chest, threatening to drown me. I needed answers. I needed to understand how everything I believed in had been reduced to this single, brutal moment. In the quiet of the apartment, I could still hear the echo of his absence, the space where his voice used to be. The silence was deafening. And yet, beneath the grief, a seed of something else took root. Not just shock, not just sorrow, but anger. I wasn't just broken, I was furious. He thought he could walk away, leave me ruined and humiliated. But as I stood there, wiping the tears from my face, a new clarity sharpened my thoughts. If he believed I was weak, incapable of surviving this, then he didn't know me at all. He was out there somewhere with his real destiny, and I was here, left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. But I wasn't going to stay broken. No, this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. I still remember the first time I met him as if it happened only yesterday. His smile lit up the room, a rare, genuine warmth that seemed to pull me into his orbit. He wasn't just handsome. He had that natural charm that made everyone around him feel seen and important. He made me feel like the center of the universe. We met at a friend's wedding, an event filled with laughter and music. He asked me to dance, and though I hesitated, feeling shy, he took my hand with such gentle confidence that I forgot every worry. We spun under the fairy lights, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. By the end of the night, I knew there was something special about him, something rare. Our love story bloomed fast and bright, like spring flowers after a long winter. Late-night conversations turned into weekend getaways, and within a year, we were inseparable. He surprised me with little things that made ordinary days magical: picnics in the park, handwritten notes tucked into my bag, spontaneous drives to watch the sunset. I had never felt so loved, so alive. I remember our first big trip together, a whirlwind adventure through Italy. We wandered through cobblestone streets, hand in hand, discovering hidden cafes and quiet corners that felt like our secret world. In Florence, he kissed me in front of the Duomo, ignoring the crowds and the cameras around us. "In this moment," he whispered, "there's no one else but us." He was thoughtful in ways that felt almost unreal. Once, when I was stressed about a big work project, he surprised me with an entire weekend planned to help me relax. A cozy cabin in the woods with no phones, no distractions. Just us and the sound of the trees swaying in the wind. On our wedding day, he looked at me like I was his entire world. I'll never forget how his voice trembled slightly when he said his vows. "You've made me a better man," he said, eyes glistening with emotion. "I promise to love you in the quiet moments and the storms, for as long as we both shall live." I believed every word. Our early married life felt like a dream. We moved into a modest but cozy apartment, filled it with laughter and plans for the future. We talked about everything, our hopes, our dreams, the family we wanted to build someday. He was my partner, my best friend. There were lazy Sunday mornings where we stayed in bed, tangled in each other's arms as the morning sun warmed the room. Evenings spent cooking together, dancing barefoot in the kitchen to our favorite songs. We would sit on the couch, binge-watching old movies, and making ridiculous bets over the plot twists. There were small moments that felt like treasures, the way he would reach for my hand in a crowded place, as if reassuring me that no matter where we were always together. The way he would look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his eyes soft with affection. He wasn't just my husband. He was my safe place, my calm after every storm. Whenever life threw challenges our way, he would smile and say, "We've got this." And I believed him, because with him, everything felt possible. The years passed in a blur of beautiful memories. There was the anniversary trip to Greece, where we watched the sun set over the Aegean Sea, our fingers intertwined as the sky turned golden. There was the winter getaway to the mountains, where we built snowmen like kids and laughed until our cheeks hurt. And the countless quiet nights at home, curled up under a blanket, talking about everything and nothing. He wasn't just thoughtful, he was ambitious too. He dreamed big and worked hard. I admired his drive, his passion for making something meaningful out of life. He had a way of making the impossible seem achievable, of inspiring me to dream alongside him. When things got tough, he was my rock. I remember when I lost a close friend and felt like the world had crumbled beneath me. He held me as I sobbed, stroking my hair and whispering that he was here, that I wasn't alone. I built my life around him, our shared plans, our quiet routines, our promises for the future. He felt like home to me in every way that mattered. Every day, I thanked the universe for him, for the love we shared. I thought we were unbreakable. It's terrifying how life can shift in an instant, how someone you trusted with every fiber of your being can one day wake up and choose to destroy everything you've built together. But back then, I didn't know that. Back then, I was just a woman in love, living the story I thought would last forever. If someone had told me then that I would one day find a note on the kitchen table, the note that would shatter everything, I would have laughed. I would have told them they were crazy. Because the man I fell in love with was good. He was kind. He was mine. Or so I thought. It's strange how, when you look back, the cracks were always there. You just didn't want to see them. Or maybe you convinced yourself they didn't matter. That's what love does sometimes. It blinds you, makes you rewrite the truth into something easier to swallow. The first crack appeared on an otherwise ordinary day. I remember it so clearly because nothing seemed out of place, at first. He came home late, something that had happened before, but this time was different. His smile felt thinner, his embrace colder, as if he was carrying a weight I couldn't see. When I asked him if everything was okay, he laughed it off. "Just work," he said, ruffling my hair the way he always did. But his eyes didn't meet mine. They darted away, like he was afraid of what I might find if I looked too closely. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, an uncomfortable thought settled into my mind. He's hiding something. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things, but the unease stayed with me. The next few weeks felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss I didn't want to acknowledge. There were more late nights, more vague excuses. His phone, once casually left on the counter or the bedside table, became a permanent fixture in his pocket. When it did ring, he would glance at the screen, his expression tightening before he declined the call with a quick swipe. I wanted to believe it was stress from work. I clung to that explanation like a lifeline, but deep down, something in me was changing. Doubt is a quiet, insidious thing. It creeps into your thoughts when you least expect it. I found myself watching him more closely, dissecting his words, his gestures. I felt ridiculous, paranoid even, but I couldn't stop. Then I found the first undeniable piece of evidence. It was a Saturday afternoon. He'd gone out for errands, though he hadn't said what exactly he needed. I was tidying up the living room when his jacket caught my eye, the one he'd worn the night before when he'd come home late again. Without thinking, I picked it up to hang it in the closet. That's when I felt it, a small, folded piece of paper in the inner pocket. I knew I shouldn't. I knew that invading someone's privacy was wrong. But my hands moved on their own, pulling out the note and unfolding it. My heart stopped as I read the delicate, looping handwriting. Last night was unforgettable. I can't wait to see you again. S. My vision blurred, the words burning into my mind. I must have read it a dozen times, hoping the meaning would change, that I had misunderstood. But there was no other way to interpret it. It wasn't my handwriting. It wasn't meant for me. My mind reeled with questions. Who is S? How long has this been going on? What else has he lied about? I clutched the note in my trembling hand, bile rising in my throat. I felt like I was unraveling, piece by piece. When he returned, I tried to play it cool, hiding the storm brewing inside me. But every word he said felt like a needle under my skin. I asked him casually about his errands. He hesitated for a split second before responding. Just picked up some things for work. His lie was so seamless, so practiced, that it sent a chill through me. How many lies had he told me without me even realizing it? I didn't confront him that day. I couldn't. I felt paralyzed by fear of what I might hear if I demanded the truth. Instead, I tried to piece things together, following every breadcrumb of suspicion. The late nights, the vague texts, the way he suddenly started caring about his appearance more, new clothes, a gym membership he never mentioned before. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. While he was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I unlocked his phone. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought he might hear it through the running water. I opened his messages, scrolling through the familiar names of friends and colleagues until I found a conversation saved under S. My blood ran cold as I read the texts. Intimate, flirtatious, filled with inside jokes I didn't understand. There were pictures too. Selfies of her, a beautiful woman with dark hair and a perfect smile. She wasn't just a random fling. She was someone who had wormed her way into the life I thought was mine. When he stepped out of the bathroom, towel drying his hair, I locked the phone and set it down as if it had burned me. I pretended to be asleep, my body rigid with the weight of what I'd discovered. He slid into bed beside me, oblivious to the fact that my heart was breaking just inches away. The days that followed felt surreal. I was living two lives, one where I smiled and played the role of the loving wife, and another where I quietly unraveled, consumed by betrayal. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind was a maze of scenarios and questions. Was he going to leave me? Did he ever really love me? And worst of all, was it my fault? Had I done something to make him fall out of love with me? I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a mistake, a phase. Maybe he could still come back to me. But each time I looked at him, I saw the distance, the walls he had built between us. And every night, when he thought I was asleep, I would hear him typing on his phone, the faint glow illuminating his face, a face that no longer felt familiar. I was slipping into a reality I didn't recognize. The love story I had cherished for so long had begun to rot from the inside. And though I still held on to hope, a painful truth was starting to take shape. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was the beginning of the end. I sat at the kitchen table, the note still clutched in my hand, my mind a whirlwind of shock, pain, and betrayal. His words rang in my head, each one a dagger to the heart. My real destiny. Living our best lives together. He had taken everything, my trust, my future, my dignity, and left me with nothing but this wretched note and the sound of silence in the empty apartment. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unrelenting. But beneath the sorrow, something darker began to take shape. Anger. No. Fury. I wasn't going to sit here and let him ruin me. He didn't get to waltz away with our life savings and build some fantasy with her while I was left to pick up the broken pieces alone. No. He wasn't going to get away with this. My fingers moved instinctively toward my phone, my breath trembling as I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, Daniel Crawford. We'd gone to school together, back when life was simpler. Daniel had always been the dependable one, the boy who stood up for the underdogs and made sure everyone got home safe. Now he was a detective in the local precinct, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. But in this moment, I needed someone who wouldn't judge me, someone who could help me make sense of this madness. I tapped his number and waited, every second stretching unbearably long. Finally, the line clicked. Hello? His voice was deeper than I remembered, more serious but still unmistakably him. For a second, I couldn't speak. The words felt lodged in my throat, tangled with grief and shame. Then, somehow, I forced them out. Daniel, it's Margaret. I need your help. There was a pause, then a soft intake of breath. Margaret? It's been ages. What's going on? His tone shifted, concern creeping in. You sound different. I let out a bitter laugh, barely able to contain the emotion bubbling up inside me. That's because my husband just emptied all our accounts and ran off with another woman. Silence. Then, he what? His voice sharpened like a blade. Margaret, are you serious? I exhaled shakily. Completely. He left a note. He's gone, Daniel, and so is every last dollar we saved. Another pause, longer this time. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. Do you want me to come over? The kindness in his words was almost enough to undo me. No, I whispered. I'm not ready to see anyone yet. I don't know what to do. You did the right thing by calling me, he said firmly. First of all, I need to know. Are you safe? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yes, I'm safe, just heartbroken. I'm so sorry, Margaret, he said softly. No one deserves this, especially not you. His words warmed something inside me, a small flicker of comfort amid the wreckage. Thank you. Listen, Daniel continued, his voice steadier now, professional. If he drained your accounts and left the country, this could be a serious legal issue. Have you checked all your cards, everything? I did, I replied, bitterness creeping into my voice. There's nothing left. He wiped out the savings, our joint accounts, even my personal emergency fund. Daniel muttered a quiet curse under his breath. Okay, this is what we're going to do. I'll make a few calls, see if there's anything unusual flagged at the banks. But Margaret, I need you to be honest with me. Are you sure you want to go down this path? I hesitated, his words hanging in the air. Was I sure? Did I want to chase him down, confront the mess head on, or just let him vanish and try to rebuild from scratch? My mind flashed to the image of him living some carefree new life with her while I was left in ruins. The answer became crystal clear. Yes, I said, my voice hardening. He's not going to get away with this. Daniel's tone softened again. All right, we'll figure this out. But Margaret, I have to ask, are you doing this for justice or revenge? I swallowed hard. The truth sat bitter and heavy on my tongue. Maybe a little of both. There was a brief silence on the line, but I could feel Daniel's understanding even through the phone. That's fair, he said quietly. Just don't let this consume you. You're better than that. His words hit me like a warning from someone who knew the cost of vengeance all too well, but I wasn't sure I could heed them. I just want my life back, Daniel. I know, he said gently, and I'll do everything I can to help you get it. Tears pricked my eyes again, not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. Thank you, I whispered. You don't know what this means to me. We've known each other too long for thanks, he replied, with a hint of a smile in his voice. I'll be in touch soon, okay? Try to get some rest. I nodded again, wiping my eyes. Okay. The call ended, and for the first time that day, the silence felt less suffocating. Daniel's voice echoed in my mind, a lifeline in the storm. maybe I wasn't completely alone after all. But as I sat there in the dim kitchen, staring at the note one more time, I made a silent vow to myself. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to fade quietly into the background of my own life. If he thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed, he was wrong. I would find him. And when I did, he would understand exactly what he'd destroyed. The days that followed felt like a fragile balancing act between despair and resilience. Every morning, I forced myself to get out of bed, even when the weight of betrayal threatened to crush me. The apartment felt emptier than ever. His absence was everywhere, an invisible ghost haunting every room. But somehow, I managed to move, to breathe, to go through the motions. Daniel checked in constantly, true to his word. At first, our conversations were clinical. Updates on the investigation, questions about financial records, bank statements, and any possible leads. But slowly, almost without me noticing, those calls and texts turned into something more. One afternoon, about a week after the initial call, he invited me out for coffee under the guise of needing more information. I was hesitant at first. I hadn't set foot outside in days. But something about the way he said, "It'll be good for you," made me cave. I needed a reason to escape the four walls that were suffocating me. The cafe was small and cozy, the scent of freshly brewed coffee warming the air. Daniel was already there, seated by the window, looking thoughtful as he swirled the spoon in his cup. When he saw me, he smiled, a genuine, reassuring smile that made something in my chest loosen. "Hey," he greeted me as I sat down. "You made it." "Barely," I admitted with a small, nervous laugh. "But I'm here." He ordered my favorite coffee without needing to ask. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a reminder that someone out there still remembered the little things about me. For a while, we didn't talk about my husband or the investigation. Instead, we talked about everything else, the ridiculous memories of high school pranks, old teachers we couldn't believe we survived, and the time Daniel had defended me from a bully when we were 15. I caught myself smiling, a real, unforced smile, and the realization startled me. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to feel light, to enjoy someone's company without the weight of pain pressing down on me. "You're smiling," Daniel said softly, his eyes warm. I blinked, as if waking from a dream. "I guess I am." "Good," he said, leaning back. "You deserve to smile again, Margaret." His words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had felt like a shell of myself, like someone whose value had been stripped away the moment my husband walked out the door. But here, in this quiet moment, I felt seen, not as a broken woman, but as me. Over the next few weeks, we met more often. Sometimes it was for updates on the case, but other times it was just an excuse to get me out of the house. Lunches, walks through the park, quiet talks over coffee. Daniel's presence became a steady anchor in the chaos of my life. The investigation itself was progressing, slowly but steadily. Daniel had managed to trace some of the transactions my husband had made after draining our accounts. He was careful with how much he told me, but I could sense that they were getting closer to something concrete. Every new piece of information felt like a small victory, a reminder that justice was within reach. But what surprised me more than the progress was how much I began to look forward to seeing Daniel. One afternoon, after a long walk through the city, we found ourselves sitting on a bench by the river. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. Daniel stretched his legs out, letting out a content sigh. "You know," he began, his tone contemplative, "you're stronger than you think." I glanced at him, feeling a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You're the second person who said that to me recently." "Because it's true," he insisted, turning to face me. "You've been through hell, and yet here you are, still standing." I hugged my arms around myself, staring at the rippling water. Some days, I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together. Daniel's expression softened. That's the thing about strength. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's just waking up and choosing to keep going, and you're doing that. I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was familiar, yet different. More weathered, more mature, but still kind. I remembered the boy who had once walked me home in the rain after I'd forgotten my umbrella, the boy who had stood by me when others hadn't. Now he was a man who had shown up for me when my world had fallen apart. A strange warmth spread through me, something I hadn't felt in what felt like forever. It wasn't just comfort, it was something more. Being around Daniel didn't just make me feel safe, it made me feel alive again. I found myself wondering what it would be like to laugh with him without the shadow of my past hanging over us. But as soon as the thought surfaced, guilt followed. My life was still a mess. My heart was still bruised, my trust shattered. Was it even fair to feel this way? Could I allow myself to find joy in someone else's presence when I was still piecing myself back together? Daniel must have sensed the conflict in me because he reached out and gently placed his hand over mine. "You don't have to figure everything out right now," he said quietly. "Just let yourself heal, one step at a time." His touch was warm, grounding. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in the steady rhythm of his presence. When I opened them again, the sunset had deepened into a rich amber glow. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need to have all the answers yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Daniel had become more than just a lifeline. He was a reminder that even after betrayal, even after the worst kind of heartbreak, there was still room for hope. As the city lights flickered on and the first stars dotted the sky, I felt the smallest flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever. A sense of possibility. The evenings had become my quiet sanctuaries, spaces where I could unravel my tangled emotions without the noise of the world pressing in. I would sit by the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It had become a ritual, an unspoken conversation with myself, a place to sort through the storm in my heart. My thoughts always seemed to circle back to Daniel. No matter where they started, my grief, my anger, my plans for the future, they inevitably led me to him. The memories of our time together in the last few weeks felt like lifelines, small moments of light amid the darkness. I would remember the way he listened, the way he never pressured me to be anything other than myself, how his presence had been the only thing that made me feel safe again. But with that comfort came confusion. Was this just gratitude? A rebound from the chaos my husband had thrown me into? Or was it something more? I had spent so long doubting myself, second-guessing every choice I made, that the idea of trusting my heart again terrified me. Yet, the more I thought about it, the clearer one truth became. Daniel had never once let me down. Not when we were kids, not when I called him after my life shattered, and not in the long days that followed. He had shown up for me, time and time again, with a steadiness that felt like the very thing I'd been searching for all along. It was strange, realizing that someone who had once been just a fond memory from my past had become the person who was helping me rebuild my present. I didn't know when it had happened, when my heart had started to heal, piece by fragile piece, because of him. But it had, and as terrifying as it was to admit, I wanted him to know. One evening, as the sunset bathed the sky in shades of gold and lavender, we met at our usual spot by the river. Daniel had called me earlier, sounding unusually excited, and I could sense something important was coming. When I arrived, he was already there, standing by the railing, the wind tousling his hair. He turned as he heard my footsteps, and for a moment, his smile warmed the entire world. "Margaret," he said, his voice brimming with anticipation. "There's news." I felt my breath hitch. "What kind of news?" He stepped closer, his eyes shining. "We found him. Your husband. He's in custody." For a moment, the world froze. His words hung in the air, surreal and incredible. I blinked, trying to process the weight of what he had just said. You found him?" My voice cracked with disbelief. Daniel nodded. "It's over, Margaret. You're going to get justice." The relief that washed over me was indescribable, a tidal wave of emotion crashing through me all at once. Without thinking, I surged forward and threw my arms around him, clinging to him as if he were the only thing keeping me grounded. "Daniel!" I laughed and cried at the same time, my heart pounding in my chest. Thank you for everything." For a second, I felt him freeze, just a heartbeat of hesitation, and then his arms wrapped around me tightly, pulling me against him. It wasn't just an embrace. It felt like the culmination of something we'd both been holding back. His warmth surrounded me, steady and strong, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole. "I've been waiting for this," Daniel whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "For longer than you know." I pulled back just enough to see his face, my breath catching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Daniel." Before I could finish, he cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but certain. "Margaret, I don't want to pretend anymore," he said, his gaze searching mine. "I've loved you for so long, and seeing you like this, watching you find your strength again, it's only made me love you more." Tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from the overwhelming realization that I felt the same. "I was so scared," I whispered. "Scared to trust myself, scared to trust anyone, but you never gave up on me." He shook his head. "I could never give up on you." A soft laugh escaped me, a sound filled with wonder and relief. "I think I've loved you too, Daniel. I just didn't know it until now." His expression shifted, joy, disbelief, and something deep and unshakable all at once. "Say it again," he murmured. "I love you," I said, my voice steadier this time. "I love you." In that moment, the rest of the world faded away. The heartache, the betrayals, the what-ifs. There was only him and me and the quiet, beautiful certainty that we had found something real amid the wreckage. Daniel leaned in, his forehead resting against mine for a tender, breathless second. And then he kissed me, slow and soft, as though he had all the time in the world. His touch was everything, healing and hopeful and true. When we finally pulled away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. In Daniel's eyes, I saw not just the future, but the promise of a life built on trust, kindness, and love. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the river in hues of silver and shadow. But for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the dark. I wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in so long, I knew that whatever came next, I would be okay. Because this time, I had someone who would catch me if I fell. And better yet, I had finally found the strength to stand on my own. A few days after that life-changing evening by the river, Daniel and I found ourselves standing outside the police station. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of early autumn, but I felt none of its chill. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, a strange mix of anticipation, fear, and resolve coursing through me. Daniel reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he said softly, his gaze steady and calm. I looked at him, drawing strength from his presence. "I need to," I replied. "I need to see this through." Together, we stepped inside. The sterile walls and muted hum of the precinct seemed to close in around us as we were led to a small interrogation room. My ex-husband sat on the other side of the glass, his hands cuffed and resting on the table. The sight of him after everything was surreal, like seeing a villain ripped straight out of a nightmare, but smaller, more pathetic in the cold light of reality. His appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his hair unkempt, but his face still wore that same mask of confidence, as if he believed he could charm his way out of anything. But when his eyes met mine, I saw something flicker there. Guilt? Regret? Panic? I couldn't tell, and frankly, I didn't care. The officer opened the door for me, and I stepped inside while Daniel waited nearby, just outside the room. My ex-husband straightened in his chair, his lips curling into a weak imitation of the smile that used to make me believe in him. "Margaret," he said, his voice soft, almost tender. "I didn't think you'd come." I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the table to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. "I wanted to see the man you really are," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not the man I thought I knew." He exhaled slowly, as though trying to summon the right words. "Margaret, I made a mistake, a terrible one, but I was confused. Things between us? They weren't the same anymore." His expression shifted to one of practiced sorrow. "You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you." I stared at him, emotionless. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the life we built together. You took everything we had and left me to pick up the pieces. I wasn't thinking straight, he pleaded, leaning forward. Please, Margaret, if you give me another chance, I can make this right. I swear, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How many nights had I cried, hoping for an explanation, for even a shred of remorse? And now that he was caught, now that he had lost everything, he was willing to grovel. But it wasn't real. I could see it in his eyes. He was sorry only because he had nowhere left to run. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm done giving you chances. The mask of regret slipped for just a second, and I saw a flash of anger underneath. He gritted his teeth and forced a hollow smile. Margaret, come on. After everything we've been through, you're really going to walk away like this? You loved me. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. I loved who I thought you were, but that man doesn't exist. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, sneering look I hadn't seen before. You think you're better than me now? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. You're just as weak as you've always been. You wouldn't survive without someone holding your hand. The words stung, but not in the way he wanted. They were empty now, the last desperate attempts of a man who had lost all control. I survived without you, I replied calmly, and I found someone who lifts me up, not drags me down. The mention of Daniel must have cut deeper than I expected, because my ex-husband's face twisted with rage. He slammed his fists on the table, his voice rising. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? The door flew open, and Daniel was beside me in an instant. That's enough, he said sharply, his presence like an immovable wall between us. 2 officers stepped in and restrained my ex-husband before he could continue his outburst. He struggled for a moment, then slumped in defeat, his face pale and furious. I stood, meeting his gaze one last time. You'll pay for what you did, I said, my voice steady. Not because I want revenge, but because you deserve the consequences of your actions. He laughed bitterly as they led him away. You'll regret this, Margaret, he shouted over his shoulder. You'll regret everything. But his words no longer had power over me. They were just echoes from a past that no longer defined who I was. Once he was gone, Daniel turned to me, concern etched into his face. Are you okay? I took a deep breath, releasing the tension that had built in my chest. I am now, I said with a small smile. It's over. Daniel's hand brushed against mine, a silent reassurance. He won't hurt you again. I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into place. He was right. My ex-husband's chapter in my life was closed, but there was still one more person tangled in the web of lies and betrayal. What about her? I asked quietly. Daniel knew exactly who I meant. His mistress fled the country as soon as she heard he was arrested, he said. We could pursue her, but... I shook my head before he could finish. No, let her go. Daniel arched a brow. You're sure? Yes, I said firmly. She's not worth my time or energy. I'm done letting people like them take up space in my life. He nodded, respect gleaming in his eyes. You really are incredible. I laughed softly. I don't feel incredible. Just free. Daniel smiled and wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. That's all I ever wanted for you. As I rested my head against his chest, the noise of the precinct faded into the background. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't haunted by the past. My heart had found its peace, and I knew that no matter what came next, I wasn't alone. We walked out of the station together, hand in hand. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. And as the cool breeze brushed against my face, I knew that this was my new beginning, one built not from shattered pieces, but from strength, hope, and love. Time has a strange way of softening the edges of pain, smoothing over the sharp cracks left behind by betrayal and heartache. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, I had begun to rebuild a life that felt like my own again. And this time, it wasn't just survival, it was living. With Daniel by my side, everything felt lighter. He didn't fill the empty spaces left by my past. Instead, he helped me create something new, something stronger. There was laughter again, real, deep laughter that I felt in my chest. There were quiet moments of peace, of morning coffee shared on the balcony, of spontaneous road trips where we left all the noise of the world behind. He made me feel safe in a way that I hadn't known I needed. I had a new job at a design firm that allowed me to stretch my creativity, a fresh apartment filled with sunlight, and the small mementos of my new beginnings. Slowly but surely, I became someone I could recognize again, stronger, wiser, and most importantly, free. But even as my life blossomed, the shadows of the past occasionally tried to pull me back. The first time my ex-husband reached out was through a letter smuggled out of the prison. When I saw the envelope with his familiar handwriting, my stomach twisted, not with longing or fear, but with exhaustion. I didn't need to read it to know what it said, but I did anyway, if only to finally put it to rest. Margaret, please, you're the only one who can help me. I've made mistakes, terrible ones, but I'm not the monster they say I am. You know me better than anyone. You know that deep down, I never meant to hurt you. I've changed. I've had time to think about everything I did, and I'm sorry. Truly, please come visit me. Help me get out of here. I'll make it right, I swear. The words were familiar, almost mechanical, the same empty promises, the same self-pity disguised as remorse. I stared at the letter for a long time before calmly folding it and tossing it into the trash. Daniel found me sitting on the couch, staring out the window. He sat down beside me, his hand brushing mine. "Another letter?" he asked gently. I nodded. The same story, different day. He didn't ask if I wanted to talk about it. He knew I didn't need to. Instead, he leaned over and kissed my temple, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. The second time my ex-husband tried to contact me was through a phone call routed through the prison system. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker. "You have a collect call from..." And then his name, spoken in that familiar tone that once made me feel safe. Now, it only made my skin crawl. I stared at the phone, my heart steady, my mind calm. Without hesitation, I pressed decline. The line went dead, and with it, any lingering doubt that I had made the right choice. Daniel looked up from across the room, having heard the brief sound of the automated voice. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. "It's over," I said simply. He returned my smile, his eyes soft. "Yes, it is." The truth was, I wasn't the same person he had once deceived. The woman who had believed in second chances, who had fought to hold on to the ruins of a life built on lies, no longer existed. I had grown, rebuilt, and learned that some doors are meant to stay closed forever. The final attempt came months later, through his lawyer. There was some vague promise of reduced sentencing if I provided a character statement on his behalf, something to paint him as a misguided man who deserved leniency. I barely read the email before deleting it. I didn't hate him anymore. That was the strangest part. My anger had burned out like a fire without fuel. What remained was a quiet resolve. He was a man who had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. I wasn't his lifeline, his savior, or his victim. I had closed that chapter of my life, locked it, and thrown away the key. With every day that passed, the weight of my past grew lighter. I no longer felt the need to explain what had happened to me, to justify why I had stayed, or why I had finally walked away. The people who mattered, the people who loved me, already knew. They saw my strength, my journey, and they supported me without question. Daniel and I found joy in the simple things: sunset walks, dinners at small, cozy restaurants, lazy Sunday mornings spent wrapped up in soft blankets with books in our hands. His love wasn't grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It was in the way he always listened, the way he remembered the things that mattered to me, the way he never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. One evening, as we sat on the balcony, the city lights glowing below us, I felt a familiar warmth bloom in my chest, the kind that reminded me of who I had become. "Thank you," I said suddenly, turning to him. Daniel blinked, surprised. "For what?" "For everything," I replied, my voice steady. "For being patient, for never pushing me to be anything other than who I am. His eyes softened, and he reached for my hand. Margaret, you did all the hard work. I was just lucky enough to be there while you did it. Tears stung my eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. I leaned in and kissed him softly, savoring the quiet, beautiful moment. The sky above was vast and open, filled with possibilities, and for the first time in so long, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. The past hadn't defeated me. It had shaped me. And as the stars shimmered above, I knew that justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in my heart. My ex-husband would spend his days locked away, facing the repercussions of his choices. His mistress had disappeared, just as fleeting and hollow as the promises they'd made to each other. But none of that mattered anymore. I had moved on, not because of vengeance or vindication, but because I had chosen freedom, joy, and love. Life wasn't perfect, it never is, but it was mine, and that was more than enough. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, casting a warm golden glow across the room. I blinked awake slowly, savoring the quiet hum of life outside. Birds chirping, the faint sound of cars passing by, and the comforting rhythm of Daniel's steady breathing beside me. I turned to face him, watching how the sunlight softened his features. He looked so peaceful, so at ease, that I almost didn't want to disturb the moment. But I couldn't help myself. I reached out and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. His eyes fluttered open, and when they met mine, he smiled. One of those sleepy, unguarded smiles that made my heart swell. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep. "Good morning," I whispered back. This had become our life, a quiet, steady kind of happiness that felt earned after everything we had been through. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was mornings like this, coffee shared on the balcony, spontaneous weekend getaways, and evenings spent cooking together while music played in the background. It was the little things that stitched our lives together in a way that felt whole. We had come so far. My past had once felt like an unmovable weight, a shadow following me no matter how hard I tried to outrun it. But now, it felt distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. My ex-husband's last desperate attempts to reach me had fizzled into silence, and that silence was a gift. I had nothing left to fear or prove. I had built something beautiful out of the ashes of what was broken. Later that morning, we decided to take a trip to the countryside, a small escape from the busy hum of the city. The drive was filled with easy conversation, laughter, and the kind of comfortable quiet that only exists between people who truly understand each other. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel and the other laced through mine, his thumb gently brushing over my knuckles as we talked about everything and nothing. When we arrived, the meadow before us was bursting with wildflowers in shades of violet, gold, and white. The air was fresh, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the moment settle into my bones. Daniel watched me with a soft, thoughtful expression. "This suits you," he said after a while. "You're finally at peace." I smiled, stepping closer to him and looping my arms around his neck. "That's because of you." He shook his head gently. "No, you found that peace on your own. I just got lucky enough to share it with you." I pressed my forehead to his, feeling that familiar rush of warmth in my chest. "We're pretty lucky then." We stood there for what felt like hours, wrapped in each other and in the quiet beauty of the world around us. The sky stretched wide and blue above us, endless and full of promise. In that moment, I felt the weight of something more, not just happiness, but hope. After a while, Daniel pulled away just enough to reach into his pocket. My heart skipped a beat as he brought out a small velvet box and dropped to one knee. My hands flew to my mouth as my breath caught. "Margaret," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're the strongest, kindest, and most incredible woman I've ever known. I've loved you for longer than I ever admitted, and I can't imagine a life without you. You taught me that love isn't about fixing someone. It's about being brave enough to build something real together. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded frantically. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes!" Daniel's face lit up as he slipped the ring onto my finger, a delicate band with a simple, elegant stone that sparkled in the sunlight. He stood, and I wrapped my arms around him, laughing through my tears as he spun me in a circle. When he set me down, our foreheads touched again, and I felt like the entire world had stilled, waiting for this perfect, fleeting moment. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, we sat in the grass, hand in hand, watching the horizon glow with hues of amber and rose. It was the kind of moment I once thought was impossible for me, a life filled with love, with safety, with promise. But it was real. I had survived the storm, and on the other side, I had found something stronger, more beautiful than I ever imagined. I wasn't defined by the scars of my past. I was defined by the strength it took to heal from them. Daniel leaned in and kissed me softly, sealing the promise of everything that lay ahead. And as the stars began to dot the sky above us, I knew without a doubt that this was my happily ever after.